Good morning. Let me ask you two questions. Is Jesus alive?
Yes.
Was he really raised from the dead?
Yes.
Okay, I've heard some yeses, and I've seen some heads bobbing up and down, so I guess we're going to believe that everybody does believe. Okay? How do you know? Did you see him? Did somebody you know and trust completely see him? How do you know the story about Jesus rising from the dead is not just anything more than a story? A nice story, a good one. Not a bad story. But is it a true story? Let's keep these things in our minds as we will look at what is happening in John's Gospel for today. It was Sunday, the first day of the week. It was that evening of the third day after Jesus' crucifixion, the day that he was to have risen from the dead. And there were 10 of the disciples gathered, and the doors were locked. And they were locked because they feared that the Jews were going to come kill them, just as they had killed Jesus. Now, there are only 10 of them there because, as Matthew's Gospel tells us, Judas Iscariot hung himself. And Thomas was not with the others, but we don't know why. It's not written. He may have gone off to visit his family. He may have been out buying food for the rest of the group. Or, you know, sometimes you just got to get out of the house. Whatever the reason for his not being there, he missed on seeing Jesus. Earlier that day, Mary Magdalene had gone to the tomb where Jesus had been buried and found him gone. She went out and saw what she thought was the gardener, and ultimately he said, "Go back and tell the other disciples that you have seen me." So Mary ran back to tell the other disciples that she had seen Jesus in the garden by the tomb. They more or less didn't believe her. But Peter and John, having also been to the tomb, ran, and they looked inside, and they went inside. And they believed something. But they still weren't entirely clear. In fact, as John put it, they did not yet understand the scriptures that Jesus must rise again from the dead. So the doors are locked. The disciples were there in fear when suddenly, unexpectedly, amazingly, Jesus came and stood among them. He was just there. And he said to them, "Shalom," that is, "My peace be with you." He showed them the scars of his body, his hands, his feet, and his side. And they were glad when they were able to see Jesus' wounds, because it meant it was really Jesus. This was not a spirit. This was not a ghost. This is the risen Christ. There's no doubt about who he is. They were fearful, but Jesus brings them peace. And then Jesus says to them, "As the Father sent me, even so I am sending you." And he promises them the Holy Spirit to be received at Pentecost. The Holy Spirit who will help encourage them, give them strength as they go out and proclaim the gospel. The gospel through which the forgiveness of sins will come. There will be no doubt now. They have met with Jesus. Jesus is alive. And that changes everything. Feeling Jesus' presence among them, they were able to take their fear and turn it in or transform it into faith. But remember, in the room that first night, there were only 10 disciples. Thomas was absent. The next time that the disciples saw Thomas, they were bursting with excitement. "We have seen the Lord. He is truly alive. He was here." And Thomas didn't believe them. He'd spent 3 years with these people. He knew them really well. And yet, he didn't believe what they had to say. They'd given him an eyewitness account of Jesus being present. And he refuses to believe. It doesn't pass his standard of evidence. Thomas said, "Unless I see the wounds in his hand and put my finger in it, and his side and put my hand in it, I will not believe. Can you imagine the frustration of the other disciples as they struggled to convince him? As the week goes by, Thomas is still resolute. Nope. But the apostles? But Thomas, we did see him. Like the other disciples, Thomas also deserted Jesus during the crucifixion. Despite listening to Jesus' teaching and seeing his miracles, all the disciples wanted now was some proof of Jesus' resurrection. Thomas, on the other hand, went one step further. He was more verbal about it. He demanded physical proof that Jesus had risen from the dead. His faith was based on what he could see. Okay, now it's 8 days later. It's the following Sunday evening, 1 week after Jesus first appeared to the disciples. And again, they were gathered in the house. More than that, Thomas was present with them this time. And as we see and heard this morning from verse 26 of John's Gospel, the very same thing happens. The doors are locked. Jesus came, stood among them, and greets them with the same words. Shalom, that is, my peace be with you. It almost seems as if Jesus specifically returned for Thomas's benefit, even knowing the very objections that he had brought up. Jesus says to Thomas, put your hand here in my hand. Put your hand in my side. Do not doubt, but believe. For Thomas, the proof was just what he needed. It was standing right there in front of him. Now, we're not told whether Thomas actually put his finger in the Lord's wound or his hand in his side. It doesn't matter to him. To have seen Jesus is enough. And immediately, Thomas utters that famous confession and statement of faith that is found in John's Gospel. My Lord and my God. There's no doubt now with Thomas. Jesus is alive. He has conquered death. He's standing in front of me. He is Lord and God. But more than that, he is my Lord and my God. All that the disciples had told him was true and is now confirmed as he meets with the risen Lord. In a way, Thomas is an unusual one. When Jesus appeared to him in this way, talking to Thomas, Jesus continues with a mild rebuke. Jesus asked Thomas, have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe. And while Thomas was privileged to see Jesus in this way, that wasn't an option that we have. There is a blessing, an outpouring of God's grace for those who haven't seen Jesus and yet still believe. The blessing is intended to reassure future generations of believers, that's us, that having seen the incarnate Jesus is not a prerequisite for faith. The proclaiming of the good news of Jesus can be the basis for faith. So, is the Christian life just about blind faith? Somebody says something we follow. That's not quite what Jesus is saying. Remember that he's talking to the 10 disciples that he is appointed to go out and tell what they have seen. It's what John says in those last few verses of today's gospel reading. Remember, have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe. Now, Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah. He is the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his name. The reason we can believe is because they have seen, and we believe their testimony, unlike Thomas originally, that Jesus is alive. The proof of Jesus is alive exists. You can hold it in your hands. It's called the Bible. The disciples were transformed from being fearful and hiding behind closed doors to going out and boldly declaring that Jesus is alive and being willing to suffer for him. It's the Word that shows Jesus is alive and what will help all who encounter Jesus. We believe through the things we have seen and written for us. The eyewitness testimonies of John and Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They all prove that Jesus is the Christ. He is the Son of God through what he said, what he did, how he lived, how he died, and how he arose from the tomb. He is alive. We believe through the disciples' witness, and so we have life, and we are, in Jesus' words, blessed. But you know, we're not the first people to have never seen Jesus and yet believe. The Apostle Peter, in his first letter, is writing to people in the same boat. Peter said, "Though you have not seen him, you love him. Though you do not see him now, you believe in him and rejoice with him, with joy that is inexpressible and filled with glory, obtaining the outcome of your faith, the salvation of your soul." Doesn't that sound like us, you and me? Let's go back to the questions I asked at the beginning. Is Jesus alive? A better question, now do you believe that Jesus is alive? The second question, was he raised from the dead? A better question now is, now do you believe that Jesus was raised from the dead? Are you able to say to him, my Lord and my God? Though we haven't seen him yet, we look forward to that day when we will see him and live with him forever. And all because Jesus is alive. Now you recall that Jesus said he was sending out the disciples to go and tell what they had seen. We are also being sent out to go and tell what we believe. Let's not keep Jesus' resurrection a secret. Let's tell others, those that we know, those that we don't know, that Jesus is alive, that there will come a day when those that we tell will join with us when we will see Jesus and live with him forever. At the close of the service today, we'll hear Father David give the dismissal, sending us out to love and serve the Lord. Two important words that are part of this dismissal are, let us. That's you and me. Let's us go out of this building into our own individual little corners of the world and love and serve the Lord. The key, spread the word. Jesus is alive!